Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Gyeongseong Creature, Season 1, Episode 8. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So in totality, for most of this episode, it's taking place like 4 days after the events of Episode 7. Even to the point that, Chiak is constantly coming back to the golden treasure, which has been shut down because Mr. Wall is they're waiting for Jane to come back. And the sad thing is they're getting calls because everyone's assuming like, well, if it's out of business, that means the rumors about Jane potentially being dead. Yeah, so it's true. And which actually pissed her off because she's like, come on, come back, especially knowing it's been 4 days. And what's even sweeter is like Miss Nawal was aware that Chiak was out there, single day waiting for him to come back too, because none of them knew what was happening. Even Mr. Gu getting Gapyeong getting tortured, and there was no information to give anyway. But I also think he didn't sell them out. We'll find out. But obviously, like, even while he was being tortured, he replayed what Miss Nawal had said to him. And once again, the moment he was captured, I was like, well, I'd already said beforehand that was foreshadowing that exact situation was going to happen. And the question would be, would he tell them anything? It's like, well, he doesn't know anything. For one, they're not connected to any, like, independence group, trying to, like, get Korea's independence from Japan. He's not the golden treasure is not associated with that, because it's like, what is your actual goal? The actual goal is just being a business. It's like he can't tell you what he doesn't know. It's like, oh, where's Mr. Jang? It's like, I don't know where he is. I wish I knew. He can't give you information he legitimately has no idea about. It's like, why'd you break into the hospital and stuff like that? Like, once again, it thinks this is part of some larger thing. It's like, yeah, he was working on Ishikawa's orders to get Myeongja. So it's like, but none of that really matters right now. So, but it's like, yeah, there wasn't much he could really tell anyway. So he kind of went through all that for literally nothing, because the questions you want to answer aren't applicable to them, because once again, they're not part of any like independence group, and he has no idea where Jang is. It also seems like it took all 4 days before Chiak ended up telling her dad, because I was like, wow, in that 4-day period, you still haven't told him. I guess like you could never find the right time. And so she's like worried about what happened at the hospital. That's also extra reason why she doesn't want to leave, because she feels guilty. It's like, I'm the one that should have stayed behind. I should have been the one I should have stayed behind. That at least he wouldn't have been alone, because at least I would have been there in the hospital getting revenge for what they did to mom. And Jung Won was like, wait, what are you talking about? And she ended up finally telling him the truth. And what hits him the hardest is, I shot at that thing and I didn't, because like in the flashback we see the necklace drop. Like, I still don't think that's supposed to associate. I don't know if that's supposed to like be like the show being like, no, he saw it, it's just in the heat of the moment he didn't register it, but now in retrospect thinking back to it, he saw it, but maybe he didn't get a close enough look at. Like I said, there's adrenaline's pumping, there's scary monsters in front of you. I think that was just the scene, because obviously it's the exact scene. They just like cut the scene in there, so it's most likely like he didn't see that. That was just for our sake, but also like once again, I don't know if that's implying like he saw it. Either way, he knows he struck the creature that is his wife now, and it's like knowing like, wow, they did that to her. Which that in itself, we got some deeper exploration into that. We found out, obviously, once again, it's a 2-part process that made Cheok's like mom the way she is. The Naijin is basically a thing that infects your brain. It's a parasite that infects your brain and controls you that way. But the way she ended up in her monstrous form is because she was mixed with the serum, which apparently has anthrax in it. Which I'm like, so that's where the anthrax comes into play. Interesting in multiple ways. For one, it makes sense in retrospect, because if you look what they like. I've never seen what anthrax would do to a regular human body except for this show. I've never seen the effects of anthrax. What it would do like to your like actual body, not just like on the insides. I mean, I'm sure what happens on the outside is also what would happen on the inside. But when you look at how the spores would like disintegrate human flesh the way it does, it's very resemblant to what happened to her flesh. Her flesh is the same consistency as someone whose flesh has been torn apart by anthrax, but that's where that comes into play. It's not the only ingredient. It's a serum mixed with anthrax, but that's where you also get like the spores and stuff like that. it seems like that's supposed to be the main important ingredient was the anthrax, so that lets you know why her complexion looks the way it does. But also, like, I guess the combination of that and the Najin, like, ended up manifesting, like, not only the anthrax sleep ability, like, where it's like, hey, you're sleeping and you have this defense mechanism of anthrax spores. But because once again, she also has tentacles and stuff. But the other thing we learned is they eat brains. I was like, oh, because I kept comparing, like, oh, it's like this creature's like a zombie. It's like, no, it's a brain eat. I mean, I kept comparing it to a vampire. It's more of a zombie. Because my entire time through the previous episodes, I was like, is she drinking their blood or something like that? Because like I said, I felt like that's how she was healing herself, but then eventually she wasn't eating blood and yet she was still healing. So I was like, oh, it's just a natural byproduct of your transformation. Well, you don't even need the anthrax serum. You just need the Najin automatically does that to you. But what I thought now in retrospect, every time when she grabbed a creature, she grabbed them from their head, and like I said, I thought she was sucking blood out of them. It's like, no, she specifically kept going for the head because it's the easiest way to get to the brain. I was like, that's what you've been doing this entire time, because we've never really gotten to see the aftermath of the bodies. We've seen what sadly Myeongja has done. She's gone through and literally sucked out people's brains from their eyeballs. Because all you see is like a massive like gap in there, like where their eye is. So she pokes a hole in it, and then I guess she just like reaches in and just like sucks it. I have no idea how she. I mean, I guess it's no different from like the Egyptian way of like when they what the whole don't they have a specific? It's not 1-to-1, but like didn't the Egyptians have like a special device like when they were about to mummify someone? That they could like basically leak your brain out of your nose or something like that. Maybe that's one of those like old like myths or something like that. But don't they have a means of like removing your brain from your nose? Like I don't know if they like swirl it up and it just comes out in chunks. I doubt you'd be able to pull out a whole like that. Like I said, that's something I heard like maybe when I was like a teenager that I always just stuck with, but I wasn't for sure if that was a real thing or not. No, I've never actually. It's one of those things you hear in life and you're like, oh, that must be true, and you just never bother checking into it at the time, or years and years later you're just like, oh, I've never actually bothered to see if that was actually true or not. Because, but either way, circling back, because of Myeongjia going on her serial killing spree, because apparently in that 4-day period, 12 bodies had dropped. I was like, that's insane. And he witnessed the first victim. It happened in his house, but he didn't correlate that. Like, maybe he probably was thinking, like, there's no way Myeongjia was responsible. She's going missing, but there's no way. Because he wasn't as high on alert. Because to be fair, she was taken beforehand, so I don't know if he assumed, like, maybe these killings have something to do with her. The person, like, all of a sudden, this person in my house, one of my maids is dead, and one of my servants or maids is killed, and she's disappeared. Maybe she had those. Nah, there's no way someone like Myeongjia could be responsible for all these murdering all these people and stealing their brains. So, and that's when Kato shows up, wondering, because he was like, at the time he figured there were 3 suspects. There's technically 4, but Mr. Soma, which I completely forgot to talk about that last episode. I remember now that him and his family got away, so we're not going to see them for the rest of the story. He's probably going to hide out somewhere else in Korea, but he's not ever going back to Japan. That was the whole reason. Like, yeah, to be able to be set up to be able to go. So they're not going back to Japan, because if he goes to Tokyo, he'll be in deep shit if they report what happened at the hospital, with his part to play and everything. So him and his family just have to disappear, and they plan on staying in Korea anyway. But so the only suspects now left are, well, because I guess Kato knows only 3 people are potentially still in town, because he knows, like, well, Soma can't really hide out as a Japanese man, him and his family. Well, they might have actually went to go see his family, and his family's going, so they're like, well, he's going. That's an easy way to deduce, like, yeah, he's going, so that's why he's not even in the conversation anymore. So it's like, right, the only people it could potentially be is Yang, Cheok, or Akiko, which made him now remember, like, oh, the maid he found, like, oh, like I said, he probably thought in the back of his head, there's no way Myeongjia did. Oh, now she's potentially at the top of the suspect list. I'm bouncing all around a little bit, but like I said, it's all going to become a little more conducive because all these story beats are just like so separate, but that's all ultimately connected. But yeah, we cut back to Jang in the hospital once again because most of it, like I said, most of the story is like it's been 4 days since episode 7. Some of the stuff is still happening like hours after the fact, like Jang's story, for example. Turns out Haneda is still alive, and he's like, "Yeah, make sure you kill him. Make sure you kill that bastard who did this to me." I was like, "Damn." And he's going to get treated. I doubt they'd experiment on him, but there'll probably be repercussions for him trying to kill all the subjects, because he was given direct orders not to do that. But he was even saying like, "Right, I'll take it up with director Ichiro." So we'll see what happens to that. But the bastard's still alive. But Jang already still has the uniform on him. He just puts on the hat, and then he sees Maeda, and he basically uses her to get out of the building. But in the process, he ends up passing out. I'm like, what's going to happen here? And she told her driver just to go on to Gyeongseong. And I'm like, once again, what is your deal, lady? You continue to be an enigma. I don't get it. Because we saw you confronting Cheok's mom. You're happy to see her in the state she's in for whatever reason. We don't know what your past relationship is. All we saw was you were being transported and you two locked eyes. I'm like, what is your history? Because and I could be misremembering, but didn't Ichiro say last episode, the woman you asked us to keep here? So it's like, even she was like, oh, so you've been alive this entire time. She just assumed that she was dead. So, because she didn't know like the full extent of what they were doing, or once again at that time, at least Ichiro hadn't reported to her what they had done to Cheok's mom, because she knew that they were running human experiments, but she didn't know what the end result was. And to be fair, Cheok's mom is the first successful situation. Once again, we saw there was something at the previous facility, but I wonder is that something Kato had kept to himself and even Ichiro wasn't aware of that? But maybe that was still a failed situation, considering the fact is that he's so focused on the creature he currently has. So, but either way, like, she had such delight in her face when she saw that. But that's why I'm like, you're mixed up in all this. In fact, you're the one that sold Jang out. You told Ichiro that Jang was trying to break into this hospital and stuff like that for Myeongjin and stuff like that. So I was like, once again, I said it time and time again about her being an enigma, and I just didn't know what she wanted. So she ended up taking care of Jang for the next 4 days. I'm like, so what is your deal? And because Jang knew she was there, but maybe he thought she was there because of Ishikawa. He didn't know specifically she was there of her own volition necessarily. It's like, right, she has her own connection to the hospital, but he probably thought like, well, you're powerful and rich enough, but maybe you're connected to the hospital. Maybe you put Myeongja there just to kind of out of the way, sure, but maybe you had no idea what was going on. Once again, the question I had earlier on in the series of, how much does she know? Does she know what's going down in the basement? Which we eventually find out she knows exactly what's going on down there. She knows everything except for what she wasn't filled in on yet. But she mostly knows what goes down in that hospital. So I think Jang hadn't quite gotten to that point yet of like, oh, I know you're associated with it, but I had no idea how much you knew. And he ends up finding out this episode like how much she actually knows. But for her, it's like, oh, like, you're normally not the type to go all out. Like, for her, it's like, oh, like, when you heard that Myeongja wasn't worth going out of, like, you could, like, she even said at the time, you'll find another way, but Myeongja is, like, out of your reach. So, just find another way to kind of handle Ishikawa. But because from her perspective, it's like, right, you're normally not the type to go above and beyond. But for him, it's like when he saw what was happening in that place, what they were doing to people, he was pissed off. And she's like, oh, as a fellow Korean? And he was like, no, as a fellow human being. Like, what human wouldn't be? And she's like, oh, so you think all human lives are equal? And he's like, something tells you that they're not? That speaks so much volumes about Maeda. Like, I don't know if that's just like an indoctrination. Like, I don't know if that's a general... once again, I can only know the historical U.S. perspective on it, which there are direct parallels to, like, black people to Koreans in a very similar situation, So I'm like, once again, I'm ignorant on a lot of, like, I've only heard tidbits about it over the years. It's never been this is my first, like, once again, it's a fictionalized take on the history, but I'm sure it's still true to history of what Korea was like, and how Korean people were treated when they were occupied by Japan. Like, you've heard of the horrendous stuff that was done, but that's why I'm talking about, like, their tidbits and stuff like that. But to kind of get this view of that, the lens of, in which the story's being told, is just kind of like, oof. But, like, that's one, my point being, like, Maeda might not have that, she's definitely not alone in that perspective. Like, we've seen quite a few people who do have that perspective. I don't know if that's the general Japanese perspective, or is it only people associated with the army that heavily have that perspective. Like, anyone back in Japan, do they immediately think that way about Korean people, or is it just those who are higher up? And, I mean, it might be, probably like any situation, there's probably a majority of people feel that way, but not everyone does. But even that sum is only a small portion, So I don't know. But, like, even I was like, and just the casualness she said, and she's got like a smile on her face. I was like, this lady is twisted. But yeah, eventually Jang is released. He goes back to Miss Noel, and she's so happy to see him. She's hitting him. It's like, oh, you idiot. Like, you nearly gave this old woman a heart attack. I was like, hug her, Jang. Hug her. But he doesn't. But it's like, oh, he has to go pick up Gyeongseong, as well as all the other merchants that were arrested. Because they were scared, because they're like, wait, Mr. Jang's not going to come get us? It's like, well, no one knows if he's still alive or not, or what happened to him. But he shows up, strolls in, sees Ishikawa, and they talk. It's like, right. The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, I held up my end of the bargain. You didn't. Because you got what you wanted in the end, and you were willing to stab us in the back, which luckily we weren't stupid enough. Once again, I don't know if that was Jang's plan or that was 100% Miss Noel. Maybe a combination of the two, knowing like Ishikawa could not be trusted. And it's a good thing you didn't trust him. But yeah, he's coming on all these charts. Oh, singing loud, playing music loud, disturbances, blah, blah, blah. Like, the fact is they were just partying. It wasn't an issue until, like, you found out those people from the hospital had gotten away. It's like, oh, yeah, so what'd you do with those people? It's like, I have no idea what people you're talking about, Ishikawa. So it's like, right. Why are you kind of putting your nose into a business that's not yours? And he's like, something I learned at the hospital is if you're going to put your life on the line, you got to go all in. And he's going all in right now because, once again, he's seen firsthand what like that hospital did to people, and seeing people locked up in cages yet again just pissed them all over again, because this is Ishikawa's bullshit. You try to force my hand. Well, this is actually your fault, because Jang grew because of this experience. Because of you putting him in this corner, it put him in this whole situation, and it made him grow as a person. And now he's not just a selfish person just trying to survive on his own. He's fighting back. He's tired of the bullshit and the way people are being treated. So seeing those people locked up again just made him think about everyone at that hospital that were locked up. The people that luckily he was able to save, but the many that they weren't able to. And so many died before they even got to the hospital. So he ends up kind of forcing Ishikawa's hands, because it's like, okay, so you don't want to do what I'm asking you? Cool, we'll shut down every business in Gyeongseong. And when that happens, it's basically like, a lot of that, the operations in this town is necessary for you, because like there's some fundraising event coming up, and some of the people's garments won't be ready at the time, and a lot of stuff is going to be behind schedule. And then some higher ups are going to come investigate, and they're going to find out your messy part to play in all this, because they'll most likely, while investigating, find out about Myeongja as well. That's supposed to be your dirty little secret, even though like everyone knows about your dirty little secret, but you're high enough that no one's going to question you about it. But any higher ups or any like investigation won't be biased in that. So your fault in all of this will come up. So, and it's going to like screw up any attempts for you to kind of rise higher in the ranks. So it's going to tarnish your name and reputation. So, but it's not only that. Ishikawa wants to know about what's going on in the hospital, and Jang's holding that over his head. Like, right, we got to, complete our deal. I held up my end of the bargain. Time for you to hold up yours. And this is valuable information. So Ishikawa lets everyone go. And, Because I love that guy tried to hit Jing, but Jing like grabbed his arm and it's like, right, you're supposed to be a police officer, kind of act like one. And it did kind of feel like, I think the guy felt a little like embarrassed. I mean, because Jing did embarrass him in front of other cops. But also it's like, right, you're acting like you're supposed to be a police officer. I don't think it's the same one. I was like, it'd be poetic if that was the same cop that let him get beat up by that swordsman guy or whatever, like back in like, what was that, episode 3 or something. I would, if it was the same guy. It most likely isn't. I definitely think it isn't because this guy had like facial hair. I don't think that guy did. But yeah, he carried Gapyeong out, and everyone else followed him, chanting Byongjeong, Bongjeong, and just like, you know, that like with pride. And Mr. Gu is being taken care of by Mr. Wall. And for him, it's like, for Jing, it's like, I owe him everything. And it's like, no, you've saved his life so many times. This was enough to repay one of the times you've helped him out so many times. At the end of the day, I think that was just her attempt just to try and make him feel not as bad about it. But either way, because he even asked her, he's like, right, the effects of torture stay with you for a while, huh? And Miss Noel kind of didn't have a response to that. You know, he knows firsthand. He probably got to witness, like, you know, how long that took for her to kind of be able to not move past it, but it's still there. It's probably not as bad, but that trauma is still buried underneath. I mean, when you go through something horrendous like that, it doesn't just like disappear, you know, overnight, and you still carry those scars with you. I mean, for all we know, she probably, most likely, like Mr. Gu has those scars. Those won't heal. They'll most likely stay. So she probably has plenty of remnants from when she was tortured. But either way, he goes and visits Cheok, and I love that he follows her just like she followed him. And it's like, oh, we have a little role reversal of episode 1. I love it. I was like, that's super cute and sweet. And she's so happy to see him. She actually hugs him. And he's just like, right, I felt the same way too. And he's like, I missed you a lot too. And I'm just like, and she's happy to hear that. I love that moment where they're at that stall, you know, getting some food. And he sees her hand, and she sees him, sees her hand. And he's just waiting for his opportunity and reaches down for her hand. But she went to go get the food, and his hand's there, and he's just tapping it because he's embarrassed. I was like, oh, no. And she sees his hand, and she knows what he was trying to do and smiles. And one of the kids there is like, you fool. And he's walking away with his head in his hand. I love it. But then she kind of puts her arm in under his. I was like, oh, that's super adorable. That's amazing. I should also note, when the people were getting released from the prison cells, there was a Japanese soldier that was smiling. I was like, who are you and why are you smiling? And they focused on it. I was like, oh, it's you. It's Mori. The guy who was already like, the guy who's kind of gotten attached to Jang. The dude who was like the driver dude that was like constantly, like, that Jang would kind of force, like, hey, drive me somewhere. You're already keeping an eye on me regardless. It's like that dude. I was like, oh, dude, Mori. And he's happy for them. And I was like, for one, I think he's happy to know that Jang's alive, but he was also felt pride and was like, oh, like, look at what Jang was able to do. That's awesome. But yeah, he's ordered to keep an eye on him again. But then when Myungja pops up, I was like, no, don't tell me. And she goes after Mori. Luckily, he had a gun on him. But I was like, we see that Jang and Cheok hear the gunshot. I was like, please someone get to. I kind of don't want Mori to die. She punctures one of his eyes with her thumb. Luckily, they got there in time, so he's definitely still alive. Ooh, so cool. I was about to say, like, Mori's not that bad. I mean, granted, we got this snapshot of him. Like, he's probably might have done some heinous stuff as a Japanese soldier, but still, or officer or whatever, but still, like, so far, he's been a decent enough dude, so. I was kind of worried. I did legitimately feel bad for him for a second, but it's like, nah, he's good. He's okay. I was like, that's good. But now they're witnessing it, and now they're finding out that, okay, so she's not as far along as, obviously, Cheok's mom, but it's still the situation of what happened at the hospital happened to her. Once again, it wasn't even technically the hospital's doing. She was supposed to be kind of left alone, at least until the baby was born. But the problem is she drunk from the cup. Once again, I don't know if that was just her decision to do that or where Mr. Soma, because he was also there with her, kind of suggested that. Cause once again, she's pregnant and maybe she was thirsty or whatever, and he offered it to her. Whatever the case may be, whether it was him offering it to her, whether she just did it on her own, she's infected now. But despite it, she is still early enough in that stage that she can remember who she is. So when Jang calls out her name, like she does pause because she's remembering and realizing what she's doing, and she runs. Sadly, Mori set off a flare, so everyone comes running. Everyone's looking for her. They don't know that it's Akiko or Myungja. Like, they think, like, oh, this is potentially the person that's responsible for this. They don't know her connection to Ishikawa, and even if they do, they probably don't even recognize or register it. Like, whatever the case may be, like, everyone's hunting her. And Chiak's concern is if they get her, like, they'll kill her, or worse, they'll take her back to that hospital. So, especially with a patient, like, in that condition running around, of course, Kato's going to want her just so he can make sure that he's able to inject her with the serum, complete the transformation. So the last time we kind of see her, she's in the woods running, and Jang and Cheok are chasing after her. Because you're kind of scared, because you're like, with all these soldiers and officers running around, you're like, hopefully you two don't get caught up in the mix, especially because Jang ended up telling Ishikawa, hey, your wife's involved in this stuff, so he wants to know how much she's involved in. And she's like, oh, I know everything at the hospital. Because they had brought this up when she was being introduced to Kato at the hospital. Her dad's someone pretty high up in the, like, Japanese military. So I was like, oh, okay. Because I knew she had to come from some background. I was like, God, I just couldn't figure out what she was getting out of Ishikawa. Because everything she's doing at the hospital, I was like, that's probably her own money and resources and power. So I'm like, what does she need Ishikawa for? It's like, right. She needed Ishikawa because she needed to get here. She needed to marry someone in the military that's decent enough, high enough rank that would also be able to get her to this location. And it's like, you benefited from my name and my family lineage because that ended up helping you move up the ranks faster because of your association. I'm the one that has more power in the relationship because of my name, my family name, my family lineage. So it was always meant to be a mutual relationship. Even he was like, yeah, we both promised to stay out of each other's personal lives. She's like, yeah, that was until you, like, I had no issue. Do whatever you want to. The problem was you got Myungja pregnant. Because that in itself was also a part I couldn't figure out. I'm like, what was the whole Myungja of it about? Was it because you couldn't have a child of your own and, like, you were going to wait for the child to be born? I was like, what was that? How was that all going to play out? What was that meant to be? It's like, you were going to, like, spirit the baby away. You were going to send that baby off somewhere else because that would have been your husband's child and it would have tarnished your name and reputation. That's all that was. It was a perception and reputation thing of my husband stepping out on me. That's our personal business. Anyone that does know about it isn't going to go spilling that business, so that's fine. But him having a child out there is a completely different situation because that will always be that little asterisk somewhere out there in that world. So it's like, right, this, so that's what it was. It was just about the shame it was going to bring about. But yeah, I was like, that's interesting. So I was like, so that's where that comes into play and what she was trying to do. Once again, she wasn't fully aware, but she knew to some extent they were experimenting on people, just didn't know the extent. And she was fine. It's just specifically she wanted Myungjae to go through it, only be touched after she gave birth. So it's like, I guess there's some semblance of, I didn't want to hurt an unborn child. I might have my beef with it on a scale of where our personal stuff is, but I have nothing against a child personally. Like, maybe that's where that comes into play. But just to kind of add a little sting to it, he ends up telling Maeda about Cheok, saying like, oh, that's the new woman in Jang's life. And I'm like, why would that matter? And I was like, oh, you like him? Which I completely forgot how all this started was Ishikawa was like torturing her for information because it's like, oh, you're having an affair with my wife. And I'm like, were they having an affair? I was like, because that's what I couldn't understand. I'm like, why are you going above and beyond for him? It's like, oh, could you like him? Like, maybe there was something going on. Maybe Jang was lying at the beginning when he was like, there was nothing going on between them. Maybe there wasn't. Maybe there was. It feels like for her to go that far from him, it must have been something. They must have actually have been having an affair. I mean, he was able to do whatever he wanted to with Myungjo, and she was probably allowed to do the same. So probably her and Jang had a relationship. So I wonder, are they the only ones that know about that? Did Miss Noel know about it? It was just a casual thing. Like, I think she was sprung. I don't think Jang was. So I think that's because she even said, like, are we, even with all this happening, are we still friends? And Jane kind of looks at her because so she was still under the impression they had their quid pro quo thing going on, kind of a beneficial situation of the sexual relationship variety. Like I said, I don't know if it was just pure sex for her, or maybe it was a little bit more for her than it was for Jang. But I'm like, now that explains a lot of that. And then finally we have her with Kato later on, finding out about the Najin, as well as the, I guess that maybe that's why it's got its name specifically as Najin, because they found it in the ice of like a specific snowy mountain of the Na people. So maybe it's supposed to be like representative of the Na people, but Jin because of like, as in like maybe like as an actual like Jin Jin, as like a monster or demon type of thing. But then she finds out that, the monster, her daughter, is Cheok. So it's like, cool, the woman that potentially took Jang from you. Like, the moment Ishikawa mentioned her name, I'm like, yeah, she's going to have a vendetta against Cheok. Now, she has extra motivation because, well, she's associated with a woman that you have some connection with too. And so fate is funny because it brought the woman that, because like, there's some connection between you and her mom, and we just don't know what. Once again, and not unless I'm misremembering, but I think because I said it at the time, Ichiro said that she's the one that gave, because I don't even want to give her, I don't want to even use the name that they gave her, like Sheishin. Like I said, I think that was meant to like erase like their Korean heritage by giving them Japanese name. Maybe that was just my understanding, and like I said at the time, I could be wrong. So that's why I don't even want to call her by that name. Because I can't remember Cheok's mom's name off the top of my head, but I'm like, so now she has that information. Now it's all coming together. Where this all takes us next, I'm curious to see, because you have Ishikawa on his way, because he's following the flares to the people that are hunting down Myungjae. At the same time, you have Jang and Cheok following her, knowing what the end result's going to be. Like, either they're going to kill her or they're going to take her to the hospital to further experiments. There's no undoing what was done to her. Like, probably the only mercy you can do is potentially kill her, because there probably is no cure for this now that it's, I mean, it's only been 4-ish days since she's been infected, so maybe it's still early enough that you could do something about it, but I don't know what you could do. You probably have to perform like a lobotomy to like get it out of her brain. But I don't know. We'll ultimately have to wait to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. It is going to be the penultimate episode. I don't know if it's the series of the season. They refer to it as a season finale, but I think they did that with other shows that are one season. So once again, Korean shows, not all of them, but typically they only run for like one season. So like I said, I'm gonna wait till I watch the finale before I talk about that discussion, and before I look into that more. I'm gonna wait just so I don't accidentally stumble across some spoilers. This probably won't be going up until Sunday, so by then I'll have all 3 episodes done. So just kind of keeping that in mind. So if you're hearing this, most likely the other 2 episodes are going to be out already, or they're going to be out like later today. But either way, I'm excited to see where the penultimate episode ends up taking us. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.